what's going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys, and welcome to video number 2 of the Spline Street Constructor video tutorial series. Man, is that a mouthful? All right, so I'm not quite sure where we left off last time. My memory is it is that bad. But hopefully since then, you guys had a chance to jump into the crossing constructor, get your hands dirty, make yourself some interesting intersections, play around with all the settings a little bit, figure out what they do, what they don't do, teach yourself some good habits, all that sort of stuff. So hopefully you had some time to play around there, right? It's very important that you get to know the program. It's a very small program, not very complicated. Even though it is not in English, it really doesn't take that long to get a handle on it and, figure out what you're doing there. Now, the examples that I gave in the last video, I did have a protractor that I was using. And at some point, I'm going to make that available to you guys on the website, on my website, on BauerBrown.com, only because it's useful. All right. Now, I don't always use it, these days, but periodically I do because it comes in handy. I've gotten to know my angles well enough that, usually I'm using a more straightforward angles, right? 90 degrees, stuff like that, but not always, right? So I end up with stuff like I have here. And in that case, the protractor comes in handy. Now I do have a solid white version, and I also made a transparent version where just the numbers are white so you can see the streets underneath. All right. So I'll make that available to you guys, right? Out of the kindness of my heart, that's what I'm going to do for you. All right. Let's see. Concerning the crossing constructor, when we did the last video, there were some things that I did not mention. Shame on me. Okay. The examples that I gave when we created the intersections, I only ever did 3 branches. All right. So for whatever reason, I only showed you 3 branches, but it is capable of up to 6. Now, I shiver to think of what kind of intersection you have going on that requires 6 branches, but hey, to each his own. All right. So anyhow, if you want to get some additional branches above and beyond the 3 that are already available to you here, you just click the button here, this checkbox. I'm not going to try and pronounce that, but you check that. And right now you have 6 available. If you don't want all 6, now you uncheck one of them, you got 5, uncheck the next one, now you have 4. All right, so that's how you get the additional branches all set up. The other thing you want to make sure, I don't know if I explained this or not, is this transform group down here. Make sure that's checked, okay? And what that does is when it creates an intersection for you guys, right here's one of my intersections. All right, you can see this 1, 2, and 3 different intersections. Let me get over to that. Let me get over to that intersection. There we go. All right. So what it does is each transform group is dead center at the end of each branch. Now, ideally, what you would do is you would take a roadway and you would drop it into that transform group and it would line up perfectly. However, it doesn't really work that way with Spline Street Constructor. It should, for me anyhow, when I import them, my point of origin is somewhere not even close to my roadway and it just doesn't work out that great. But I do use these transform groups for another purpose, to be able to line my road up perfectly straight, right? So you want to make sure that you have that checked when you're making your intersections. Now, if you got a little bit ahead of yourself or you just didn't realize and you made your intersections, you can just remake them that easily, right? So you bring this up in this intersection, for example, where it says, the 115/70, just retype that in there, 115 and then 70. And then make sure your transform groups is checked there and you're good to go. All right. So you can recreate those without much issue. All right. So those were the 2 things that I wanted to mention about the crossing constructor that I'm not sure if I did or did not during the last video. All right. So there you have it. I got that out there and that's it. Let's move on to the Spline Street Constructor. All right. Now with the Spline Street Constructor, let's get over to the folder for this one. All right. Same deal as a crossing constructor. Okay. You got all of your INI files here, your configuration files. We have all of our i3Ds that will come in handy at some point or another, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Texture files. Again, you have your instructions, your PDF, which should be in English. I think I updated that on the website. I apologize for that, by the way. I uploaded the copy that was still in German. So I got that updated. I got the English instructions up there. Oh, no, wait, that was a crossing constructor. I'm sorry. So I guess I I guess I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. As if I ever did. All right. But anyhow, so like I said, all the same, the normal things. If, at any point we're going to use any of these, I'll definitely show you where and when we're going to use them. But just like the crossing constructor, I encourage you to get in there, get your hands dirty, play around with the settings, play around with each one of these different things. And all these are really examples of stuff. So you can actually just drag it into your map and then have a look and see, what exactly it is. Okay. And these are all the different things that are achievable with using the crossing constructor. So some of these are pretty cool. This here, no, not very complicated, right? It just looks like bridge ends, I guess. Something like that, maybe bridge ends. Kind of. Yeah, something like that. Believe it or not, I don't play around with too much of that. So this actually, you can see where this would come in pretty handy. You run a little spline, one spline like across a gap, right? And that will create at least the base for you. And then with that same spline, you run it again and just create the roadway that goes over top of it. And then there you have it. Right? Pretty cool. I think I can see how that would come in handy, no doubt. I have not played with any of this stuff. I'll be right up front about that. Most of the things, it's just streets. Streets is all I've ever done with it. I have been interested in getting into railroad tracks. Now, I know way back in the day, I actually had an I&I that was railroad tracks. Don't know what happened to it. I have no clue what I did with that. It's just a click of a button and you can create railroad tracks that easy. You just needed the texture. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create my own texture for these tracks, but alas, I cannot find it. But it's really not hard to create within the program itself. I just haven't really gotten there yet to really spend that kind of time playing around with it. All right. So like I said, that was the folder itself. It contains the normal items you would expect to find there. Same as the crossing constructor. Now, as far as the program goes, let's open that up. There is a little bit going on with this, so it's going to take us a little bit of time to get through it. I'm not going to get overly crazy with the explanations on this stuff. I'm going to I don't want to say skim through it, but more or less, it's kind of what I'm going to do. Because what I really want in the long run is for you guys to go over these instructions, read things over very carefully. To this very day, when I run the Spline Street Constructor, I still refer back to these instructions every now and then to see what a particular parameter does or a function or something like that. I just, I check it out to see, what I could be doing differently. I do a lot of playing around, to figure out what does what. It's the best way to get to know a program. Okay. So that's why, we're going to more or less skim through things. And I recommend that you guys get back into these instructions and read them very carefully over and over if you need to. And there is a lot of information in here, a lot. So, what I'm going to teach you guys pales in comparison to what can actually be learned through the instructions alone. All right. So let's get into the instructor. Okay. Same as the crossing constructor up here, we have the i3D file. That is the i3D that we will be exporting. Okay. So we can open that up and we'll find a folder where we are going to export to. And in my case, it would be, let's go into mods, tutorial series, objects, roads. Okay. So I have one in there for intersection. This one, I'm going to make another one called completed road. Like so. Click save. And I will be reusing this one over and over. Okay, like I said, you do have options that you can create a new one each time, but that's tedious. I don't really recommend, not that I don't recommend doing it. I mean, I personally wouldn't because it just takes so much time having to create a brand new one each and every time. I do get to a point with my roadways where periodically I will export the entire thing, intersection, roadways, everything. And in this way, if anything should happen, I just have to drag it back into my map and I'm good to go. I didn't lose anything. All right. Because it's very easy to lose entire road systems. That easy. It really is. But we'll cover all this. All right. So the very next thing we got down here is the shape name. This is going to be the street itself. I usually start with let's say like RD1 for road 1. This you're going to want to change with every consecutive road that you make. Road 1, road 2, road 3, road 4. You get the idea. All right. If not, and I do this all the time, I forget to change it. And now you just have, 10, 15 different road ones in your scene graph. And that's not really helping anybody out, right? Okay. After that, we have generate left border and a right border. So unlike the crossing constructor, we have two different borders that we can work with, right? So we could give one like a grassy edge. We can give the other one like a sand edge or a stone or something like that. So that's kind of neat. Same thing as crossing constructor. This folder here, this is where you pick the actual texture that you're going to use. So if we use verge, right? And that would be that grassy texture. Now you can, once you have the left set up, if you want to have the right set up exactly the same way, you just copy that over, hit that copy button. That'll copy everything over to the right-hand side. Now this length, I know in crossing constructor, I was a little bit confused about how they were using this within the with it for intersections. Now, I did play around with it a little bit on the crossing or on the Spline Street Constructor, and I got a few things figured out there. Part of it I already knew. I just didn't really use it for the edges at all, for the borders. What I did is I used the length. I was playing with the length on the roadway texture. This is the part that I already knew. If your roadway looks like stretched out at all, like your texture looks a little bit stretched, a little bit funky, you can lower this down to a lower value, and that will actually, for lack of a better word, it'll condense your texture, right? It'll get it more to a normal look. Let's say you have a street that you're trying to put down and it has dotted lines on it. If those dotted lines look really long and stretched out, just looks weird, you can back off on this number and it'll start squeezing in that texture a little bit, and it'll get your texture look a little bit normal. Sometimes they can become so stretched that they just look weird. They kind of look blurry. They look warped a little bit, right? So play around with this one. This is going to be this length here for the roadway texture, something that you're going to be playing around with periodically as you get going on your roads. All right. So the length that you see here is basically the same thing. All right. Now width, I believe on this, it's the same thing as crossing constructor. Remember the start value that was there? All right. Remember this start where you can move in 1, 2. All right. I believe that this is the same thing. Now, again, you're going to want to refer to the instructions on this one and see what they had for width. Let's see, road geometry, parameters for the border, copy date line. All right. The width of the texture in meters. Okay. So that basically is the same thing. The only difference with this one is there's a pixel. All right. So where this pixel is if you know that, say the texture that you're using is 1024 by 512. All right, 512 will be your width. You can put the 512 in there. And what that does is when you click this button below it, that kind of automatically figures out the end. Now you give it like the start. This width here is the start, and it will figure out the end for you. Again, read the instructions. I can't really explain it nearly as well as what the instructions is going to do. Now, I will tell you that under normal circumstances, and I did say this for the crossing constructor, is that most of the default values are going to work pretty well for you guys. All right. You're not really going to, it's not going to make that much of a difference that it's just going to look hideous or it's not going to work. All right. So you'll get yourself a usable roadway that looks fairly, it looks good, right? That you don't really have to worry about, getting into this stuff right away. Once you're comfortable with the Spline Street Constructor and you can kind of, you're good at generating roads and, overcoming errors and stuff like that. Not errors, but maybe unexpected. I don't know what I want to say. Sometimes when you make a road, it'll do something you don't want it to do. And you might have to tweak a few things to get the road, exactly the way you want it. That's what I'm trying to say there. All right. So, and at that point, once you get used to all that, that's when you start playing around with this other stuff and tweaking things and really getting to know the program. All right. This reset instead of mirroring, I'm just going to tell you to go ahead and read the instructions on that one. It has to do with the way that it generates the texture. Now, the border segments is pretty neat. Now, this is something that we didn't have in Crossing Constructor, where it actually gives you a visual. If you go down here to show profile, oh, really? You're going to do this? Come on. I know what the problem is. Let's put a 0 up here in pixel. All right. And now show profile. There we go. Okay. Now, this is what I was trying to explain to you guys in Crossing Constructor. You can create your own profile. Like those train tracks I was just talking about. I could actually come in here and just by going, see it, it'll show you like a segment 2. This is segment 1, by the way, this top segment here. And then segment 1 is the one just below it, right? So it starts at the roadway and working your way out is how the segments go. So if I was going to create a segment 3, right, I could just click this plus button. And then I got a segment 3, and then I just got to put in like the width of what I want that segment to be, like say 1.5, an angle of, I don't even know an angle, let's say 45. Oops, that was 0.45. I don't want to do that. And then the end, I'm still not quite sure on that one. I have to look that one up. Instructions again, I suppose. All right. And then you could redraw. Whoa. There you go. You see, you get the idea. Now you can play around with it and say, okay, so maybe 45 wasn't good. Maybe I need something more like 90. Let's try that. Or negative 90, probably. Yep, negative 90. Redraw. Oh my goodness, what do I have going on here? But you see, you get the idea though. So you can play around with this, right? And you can come up with some interesting designs, right? It's going to take a little bit goofing around, figuring out how they're working the angles and this and that. But you get the idea. This is how you can recreate your railroad tracks if you want to. You can do all sorts of stuff with this. All right. So that's what's going on here. Okay. And that's what this left border segments here. Now I have 3. I didn't think it saved that last one, so I can get rid of that. Now I'm down to 2 again. Right. The deal minus, once you have it highlighted, so you can scroll up and down, like say if you didn't want segment 2, you just hit the minus and that'll get rid of it. Or you can hit a plus button to add a new segment. That's what's going on here. Okay. And that's for the left and the right. Now, what you could do is you can just set up, left-hand side. And like I said, when you're ready, you can just copy everything right over to the right-hand side. All right. So that's a pretty handy function. It's a pretty handy feature to have. So at some point or another, I recommend going in there and playing around with that. Maybe you don't like such a hard angle on your borders, right? Maybe you don't like this and you want to lessen up that angle a little bit, or you don't like this bottom piece being too long and you want to stretch that out a little bit, lessen the angle on that. You get the idea, right? So at some point or another, now I've done it with old maps, and what you'll do is you'll go ahead and you'll make something the way that you want it, and it looks really good and it works for you. And then you just save it. You can save these parameters, right? You can save, parameters for the left border, or you can load parameters for the left and right border. Where does it have parameters here? Okay. And you can even show your parameters, which is pretty nice. All right. So if you wanted to, you can copy this in itself, where you have, everything in one nice, neat little package, right? All right. So we got load parameters, save parameters. So if you come up with something that works really nice and you want to save it, you go ahead and you give it, another name, like we have tutorial, or I could put tutorial SSE for Spline Street Constructor. So I know I have, something specific, and I've done this on maps where my roadways were specific to that map, right? They weren't the same as I used on every other map. So I would make up my own, your own configuration file. Not only that, but when you go and you work on a different project, you're going to be changing configurations, right? So then when you come back into this map, you want to have that configuration there, so you can just load it up and it puts everything right in here, nice and neat for you, and you're good to go. Okay. So that's what all this stuff does. The load parameters, showed parameters, save parameters. You get it, right? All right. This is definitely turning out to be something. All right. So on to the roadway. Okay. We have, and there's a copyright too. Sorry. So you can set up your right border if you want and copy it over to the left. Like you get the idea. Now the roadway, again, here's the width. So this is the actual width of your roadway. If you want to do, 5 meters, 7.5 meter, 9 meter, it's kind of up to you guys. That's going to be a personal preference. I do 7.5 on the map that I'm currently working on. I'm doing 7.5, but I have done different widths depending on the map, the situation. I've done highways where, they were as big as like 10 or 15. They were pretty wide. Okay. Now roadway here, this checkbox, if you're not doing, say, like a street, you're just doing like a lane, like a driveway or something, like a really skinny street that just goes down to your property. You can uncheck that, and that will make a little bit of a difference. Under normal circumstances, I'm not going to try and pronounce these checkboxes right here. There's Tractrix and Fulcrum. All right. I do not keep those checked. Okay. That's going to make a big difference in your roadways, and you want to look that up. Now, the problem here is since we're using the English version, right? When you look inside the instructions, all right, this stuff no longer matches since everything's in English, but the program itself is still in German. Some of the things don't really match up that well, right? So they tried to be nice, and they tried to translate the actual like file length, width, and stuff like that. But in here, in the instructions, they don't have it listed that way. It's still in German. So it takes you a minute or two to look some things up. And what was that here, though? Okay, I think the Schlepp curve and Curvensters, those were the two that I was just talking about. All right, and this is, where it says if the check mark is set here, the road will be in curve. The curves widen. The larger the parameter, the greater the change in the width. All right, this will change the width of your roadway, okay, as you go around curves and stuff like that. And it gets really funky. All right, so this is something that I recommend that after you get good with the program, then you can come back and you can check these to see what kind of effect it gives you. Same thing with this Curvensters, right? It's a curve super elevation, right? And what that is when it's say you're making like a left-hand curve, just like a sweeping curve, nothing real hard. It will actually raise one side of that, like say the outside of that curve, it'll raise up like you would see like on a raceway or something, right? And it really makes things a little weird. Now with the as far as the Spline Street Constructor goes, right, and this goes with the crossing constructor as well. When you make your intersections, you want to make sure that these are laid down flat, right? You don't want to have them rotated. Well, the rotate is fine if you want to rotate it on its y-axis, but on the x and z axis, you don't want to rotate at all. So if like right here, you can see that my road heads down a little bit, right? So you don't want to try to angle. You know, you don't want to try to angle your intersection so that it mates up with, you know, your ground surface in your map. You'll never get your roadway to connect up well with that. It won't happen. For the most part, your roadway is going to lay down flat unless you have some kind of weird settings going on. I always keep mine flat. It's just the best way to go. And you want to do the same with your intersection. If your intersection is not level, you will never, ever be able to mate those up without something look weird and like something sticking up. And so you got to keep them flat. So like this one here, for example, all right, I would actually bring this down to a point where I'll maybe split the difference, because you can see like if I keep it like right here, you can see how high. I mean, that's a pretty good difference between those two, between right here, between the road surface and the intersection itself. So what I'll do is I'll either dip that down, and then you could either use like the replace function over here in your sculpting, or I'll just hit the plus button, right? And I'll fill all that up, and then I'll smooth it out and try to get everything nice and level. And that should be okay, right? And you can come back and touch it up as you go. But at least for now, you know, you got something fairly level. Now, don't worry about the rest of your roadway because doesn't meet up exactly. We'll be taking care of that when we put down the road itself. I'll show you how we're going to take care of that. All right, back into the street constructor, moving on down the list. We got the roadway texture, which again is pretty self-explanatory. You hit the folder and you can pick the actual texture that you want to use. So we'll use the dotted one here. That'll give us a pretty good example. Actually, or should we use this Barbon? Let's try that one because this will match up with the intersection. So we'll click that. We got the length again. So like I'll be able to show you on one of these. If we do one with the dotted lines here, I'll be able to show you what that length does. Maybe we'll run that first and I'll be able to show you. You can do it that way. Oops. Then when I cancel. Okay. Texture width, again, this gives you pixels. So if you know that your textures say 2048 by 1024, and you can actually just go over there right now and see what it was. So let's go into where was that? I think I kept my textures. Oh yeah, I would have had to keep it in my map itself. Because if you don't, it's not going to work. So keep that in mind. I think I mentioned that with Crossing Constructor. your textures are going to have to be wherever you're exporting your i3D to. That's where you're going to want to have your textures at the same spot. They need to be in the same directory, right? If not, you're gonna have issues. Okay. So while I'm at it, for now, let's just do this. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit properties, and this is 1024 by 2048. All right. So we could actually just plug that right in while we're at it. So our width here, where was I? Texture width was 1024. Okay. All right. And then here's the begin and end. This is the same thing with the UV. I think this is the same thing as the UV. And with the UV, I meant the start and the end. Remember where you can move in a little bit if you're trying to cut off the edge of the roadway. That's what this would be. All right. That's kind of nice to plug that in automatically. So if you wanted to cut off the left edge, you would put 1 there. See, now this looks like it's stopping short. It's not going all the way out to the right edge, which is fine, I think. I'm not sure. We'll have to see what it gives us. I can't remember the settings that I used on my last one. Flip randomly, I think is exactly what it says. The texture itself, as it's laying it down on the roadway, it's randomly flipping that texture. You may not want it to do that. If you have markings on your roadway, it might make it look a little bit funky. But if it doesn't have like stripes down the side or lines down the middle or something like that, that might work pretty good. Again, I can't stress enough to go back and check the instructions on what a lot of this stuff means. It gives you a much better explanation than what I'm going to do. I'm just giving you the basics to get you set up, with a road that works that you can use. Alrighty. And then last but not least, the spline points here. This is what's going to come in really, really handy. It's a very important feature, but I'm going to show you that when I get there. We are going to be exporting a spline, right? We're going to have some objects that we're going to lay down on our map surface. And then once they're down, we're going to export them over to the program, and we're going to use the program to make a roadway based on those objects. All right. Now, like I said, there's some folks out there right now that are doing some tutorials on the Spline Street Constructor, and it seems like 95 to 98% of them are doing it the same way, which in my opinion is the hard way. Take my advice, and any one of those videos that if you have already watched, forget everything they told you. Actually, I don't want to be mean. Let's not do that, because the process does work. All right. So it does work. It's just very slow. It's very tedious. But I don't know. I mean, if you want to stretch out you want to maximize the enjoyment and stretch out the amount of time that you're spending on your map. So instead of getting your roads done, like in an afternoon, if you want to spend a week doing it, and just, like I said, maximize the enjoyment, then by all means stick with that method. But we are not going to be doing that way. And you're probably confused what I'm even talking about right now, but I'll show you in a few moments, and you'll see, you'll know. All right. So over on the right-hand side, we have a few more things that we want to do. Generate transform group. This checkbox you can see down here in the lower right-hand corner. Make sure that's checked because we want to utilize these transform groups. Fill front surface. All I'm going to say is read the directions. I've never used it, so not quite sure what that does. And then traffic splines. Definitely, you want to keep these checked. Now, if you're doing something small with just like a lane or a driveway, something like that, you can click just the center. This will make one spline down the center of your completed roadway that you can use in your traffic system. That means that you do not have to come back when your roads are all done and put all these splines down by hand. Now, if it's the type of street where you have, the left side, right side, where you're going to have traffic, going in each direction, then you click left and right. Really, really easy. Okay. And that will about cover the actual settings and all, what everything does inside of the constructor. I probably could have skipped all of that and you would have been okay anyhow, but at least I can say, hey, I showed you. All right. So let's get over to our map. So there's going to be a couple things here outside of the obvious, right? So we need crossing constructor. You got to have a copy of that. You can get that from my website, or you can just do an internet search for it and you can find crossing constructor many, many places on the internet. Same with Spline Street Constructor. I have a copy on my website, but you can find a copy just about anywhere else. So you do need those two things, but there will be some additional tools that we're going to be using, and I'm going to go over them with you right now. One, we're going to need Notepad. I use Notepad++, but any type of Notepad text editor, you're going to need one of those because, yes, I'm going to use that in the creation of my roadways, and you will see why. The next thing you're going to need is the spline tools. Okay, obviously, because we're going to be working with splines, we want to have these spline tools. Now, there's two different versions that I use here for different reasons, but I'm not really going to get into right now. One of them that you're going to want, if I go up to scripts and we have the updated spline scripts. Okay, this is the ones that we got from Farmer Boys Modding. And if you remember that, I'll show you over here. If you go to, if you get to Farmer Boys Modding, this very top part here where it says topics, if you go down to the very bottom one there, it says updated spline, CSV, height, paint. You want to click on that and then scroll down to the bottom of this first section here. Okay. And right here is the zip file where you can download that. All right. Now, same as my site and a few other sites out there, you do need to be registered and logged in to be able to interact with the site and download and stuff like that. If you want to comment on anything or ask a question, because these guys are super helpful, really nice guys. And if you have any questions, they'll definitely help you out. Within reason, put in the legwork yourself. I'm gonna tell you that right now. I mean, that's one of the big things when these guys ask questions. Not you guys in particular, but it happens a lot where they just random people ask just the weirdest questions and they don't really put in any of the work themselves to try to figure things out and say, okay, I tried this, this didn't work. Where do I go from here? You know, that they don't try anything and say, well, how do I do this? Well, you know, it comes with instructions. You really need to do just a few things on your own. So that's why the purpose of this tutorial is to kind of hold your hand as we go through some of this so you can say you tried certain things. All right. Anyhow, so like I said, you're going to need a copy of that. Now, one of the things that I use myself is an older copy. It's the original TrackMax copy, version 1.3 of those scripts. All right. So when you look at my scripts, you can go up here to the updated spline scripts. But I do have, let's go into window and go in the script editor really quickly. You can see I have this, where is it? Spline placement execute. Okay, so this is the original version. This is the version 1.3. Now I do this. There's, like I said, there's a couple different reasons that I'm really not going to get into right now. But you're going to be using this script a lot, a whole lot. All right. So what you can do with this one, with this 1.3 version, and I will try to make this, you know, not accessible. I'll try to get this all together and I'll make it available on my website. So you guys can download this copy also if you would like. All right. So you'll have both the updated version, which is extremely handy to have. I definitely recommend getting over to Farmer Boys and grabbing a copy of that. And if you want the older version to play around with, then definitely I'll make this version available to you. You don't find it too many places anymore, believe it or not. I don't see it too often out there. But like I said, I do use this one for different reasons. All right. So if you want to go, you know, do the same thing, that's fine. And I will tell you right now that Farmer Boys will work just fine. There are no issues with that. Now, for me, I like to have things pre-populated. And that's one of the things I like about this version of the script is that I can put my object distance in there. I can get everything set up just the way that I like it. And then I don't have to do anything else at that point. I can just keep rerunning the script as many times as I need to, and it will keep the same parameters. All right. Farmer Boys is not that. It's not that way right out of the box. You need to do a little bit of work to get it that way. And what I mean by that is each time that you run the script, right, you have to have your user attributes window open. And each time that you run the script, all those attributes to be blank and you need to fill them all back in again and then run the script. That gets to be kind of a pain in the butt. Right. So what you can do there to overcome that is if you go up to updated spline scripts, right? You want to find the one that sets up your transform group. Spline, there we go. And here you can set all your, like I just showed you on my other script, you can set the object distance, anything that you want to have set, you can preset those values. So each time, you know, you run the script, it will come up with these values. You don't have to plug them in every single time. All right. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's a nice little tip if you want to keep using those, if you want to use that version of the of the spline of the spline tools. All right, now with this, so once we have all of our spline tools downloaded and our scripting tools, and we're ready to use them, the next thing you want to make sure is I usually have a folder set up somewhere, like say maybe inside a map, and then I'll have something that says road system, right? So maybe I'll take start with our intersections, make a group out of that, and we'll rename this like road system. Man, my typing is off tonight. Road system. Okay. Move my intersections inside of there. Now inside of here, I usually have two additional folders or transform groups, and there will be streets, intersections, and then whatever else I decide that I want to put in there. All right. And then this I'll call intersections. All right. And then I'll move this up underneath map. So you want to keep everything organized, nice and tidy. It's very important that you don't have a messy scene graph. I usually keep mine nice and neat, but there have been times where I have not, and things got kind of messy, right? And it's not helping anybody. So you want to try and keep that nice and neat. All right. So from there, we're pretty much set up. All right. So I'm going to walk you through this once really quick on how I actually do this street here. All right. So like I said, your intersections, you want to have level, right? Make sure they're not rotated or anything like that. This one I'm going to bring down a little bit. I'm going to like split the difference here between these two. And what I mean about split the difference, right? So if I keep it, what I'm looking at is this edge right over here on the left-hand edge, right? So if I keep that this is flush, all these other ones, all my other branches here are either really high up in the air. And what I'll do is if I have to fill them in, I'm going to make kind of a hump here, and you may not want that. Or if I put this one too far down in the ground up here on the left-hand side, then I'm going to make a dip down there when the road tries to mate up to it. And you want to try to avoid that. So I split the difference so there's not too much of a hump, too much of a dip. All right. And then, like I said, I'm going to show you how we're going to get this. We're going to prepare our road surface, right? So this will work nice for us. Like I said, all I'm going to do is fill this in, and then I'm going to start smoothing it out. Maybe take a little bit off right there. You don't have to get too crazy, but like I said, you want to make sure. I might have just taken too much off. You want to get too crazy, but you want to make sure that this thing isn't floating up in the air at all. Because it can interfere with, let me bump these down a little bit. It can interfere with placing your roadway. You get a little too crazy here. Like I said, too much of a gap, and whatnot. Now, like I said, I do my roadways a little bit different than most people. So, keep that in mind, that there are a few extra steps. So it could go a little bit faster, but I prefer quality over quantity, I guess. Let's put it that way. All right. All right. So now that we have those prepared, we have our intersections prepared. Okay. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to create a transform group. Let me go up here to scripts, updated spline scripts, detach menu, so I can keep using this. All right. And I'm going to go to spline placement transform. I'm going to click on that, and that's going to create a folder over here for me. And this is what I'm going to be using for placing my objects. All right. So we can see I have spline objects down here. Now this first one where it says spline objects, you can rename that. Maybe you want to rename it roadway layout. And the reason for that is I will reuse this. I'll constantly reuse this over and over and over. And I give it a name because sometimes I have one set up for utility poles. Maybe I have another one set up for, you name it. I have bunches of different things going on at the same time, and they all involve the spline placement script. So I try to keep them organized so I know what's what. All right. Under spline placement, we're going to need objects to place, right? So what are we going to place down? Now, what I was referring to when I say other people out there do things slightly different than what I do. All right. What I meant by that is they have, you can see on some of the videos, they have this white piece, right? It looks like a section of a roadway. It looks something like this profile here, right? It's about the width of the road. It's, I don't know, yay wide, yay long. That's not what we're going to be doing. All right. We're not going to be laying those down. All right. We're going to be using a spline. This is Spline Street Constructor after all, right? So the pieces that I was referring to, what they would do, and I can show you really quick here. We can create a primitive, right? Let's create a plane. And this is just going to be an example. All right. So they would have something that was about, like yay wide. Now it might have been curved a little bit. Oops. It might have had some like tapered edges on it or something. But what they would do is they would come down and they would lay one right here. Right. And then they would, duplicate that, and we'd make another one down here, and you get that lined up just right, like so. All right. And then you keep going and keep going, and holy hell, no. No. Why would you want to do that on a, like, maybe on a 0.5 kilometer map or something? That might be okay. Or on a super flat map. Okay, maybe. And again, that's if you like wasting time, which I do not. I want to move on. I want to get on to the decoration thing. That's where I want to. Start like, fleshing out my map, putting in some foliage, working with the buildings, the actual build process. I don't want to be stuck in there forever. So that method right there, forget everything you ever learned about that, because it's going to do nothing but hold you back. And like I said, I'm not picking on anybody that uses the method, because it works. It definitely works. That's kind of the rookie way of doing things, right? So I know a lot of us are rookies. We're just learning this, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a much easier way to do it. And that's what I'm going to show you guys. Just forget all about that nonsense. That's what boggles my mind. Wow. I would not want to do it that way. All right. So anyhow, objects to place. If we're not going to use those big white hideous things, what are we going to use? Let me get into my SSC English here. All right. And the copy that I provided you guys on my website on BauerBrown.com, on one of these i3Ds that are inside of there, we have something called post. All right. Now what you want to do is you need to copy these over to your base game, right? So you can't use them right out of this folder. You have to copy these over to your, well, actually, I guess you could keep them here because you're going to be deleting them anyhow. So yeah, you probably could. You can use them right out of this folder because like I said, you're going to be deleting it. You're not going to keep these. These are only temporary. All right. So now it does come up like box 001, but when you look at it, you'll have something that looks like this little square post right here. Okay. Now, if you happen to have like a different version of Spline Street Constructor, maybe you didn't download it from my website, you got it from somewhere else, and those guys weren't nice enough to give you one of those. All right, what you could do is just go up to File, go to Create, go to Primitive, and then just go to Cube, put that down, and then you can just stretch that thing. Now, you don't want it like giant. You don't need this thing giant. It's going to be very small, very skinny. All right. So from here, probably I don't even know if I would go that high. That's pretty big. By my X and Z, I would probably do something like my number lock off. Yeah. Maybe 0.25 by 0.25. Yeah. Even that's kind of small, but it would work. It would serve its purpose, right? This doesn't need to be a specific size. It doesn't need to be that tall either. It could be like that. That looks about right. Right. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy. All this is a marker, right? So those white squares that most people lay down on the roadway as they go along. All right. Now, the good thing about that, man, I'm not even going to mention that. All right. But anyhow, those white squares, this is basically that white square. This is what we're using in place of that. Okay. But we're going to do it much easier. You're not going to have to come through and lay each one of these by hand. We're going to use that spline placement tool to lay these down for us. Okay. And this is going to come in. It's going to be nice. Trust me. You're going to enjoy this. This is going to be very, very, very fun. All right. So just bear with me here. We're getting there. All right. So take that box that we just had there, that post, and you can rename it post if you want. If box is confusing, just rename it post. Really easy. Now, using your middle mouse button, All right, click on it and drag that up in the objects to place. There we go. So now we are more or less set up and we're ready to go. The only thing we need to do is create a spline, and we can do that right now. All right, we create our spline by going up to create. Let's go down to spline. Okay, now ideally, and I really wasn't thinking ahead when I was shooting that tutorial video. Ideally, what I would have done is the splines that I used when I created these roadways here. I'm not sure what splines I have in there right now. I can see ones that I have for paint. Anyhow, when I created these roadways, right, I used the spline to create these. I should have saved those because I could reuse those same splines for Spline Street Constructor. All right, and that would have been really, really easy. That would have been the best way to do this. But I wasn't really thinking ahead, so I'm going to have to do my spline over again, which is fine because I want to show you guys some things here. All right, so now this spline, you don't want to leave it right where it's at. You want to use your middle mouse button again, and you want to drag this one up into spline placement. Okay, so it's inside that spline placement transform group. All right, so now we have that spline. Now, actually, what I want, oh man, I'm sorry. I got you all screwed up again already. Let's hit Control Z. Forget that I told you to move that up inside of there because it does go there. What I want to show you is how to place the spline so that you know that it's lined up right in the middle here, okay? Because what happens is if you eyeball it, especially if you have lines on either side of your road, they're going to be maybe a little off to the left, a little off to the right. They're not going to match up exactly where you want them. And it's going to be a real, pain in the you-know-what to try to redo your roadway. You can maybe shift it left or right a little bit to try to kind of rush it into position, but that doesn't always work out. It's better if you get it right the first time. So let's put it that way. All right. So forget that I told you to move that up in the spline placement because it does go there and we will be moving it there. But for right now, I just want you to hit Control X to cut. Okay. So once you cut that, click on the intersection where we're going to start. All right. Open that up and let's look for the end that we're going to start at, which is right there. Hit Control V, paste that spline into there. Okay. Now we can use our middle mouse button and we can drag that down into spline placement. All right. Seems kind of like a silly step to have to take. You're like, well, that was just ridiculous. We just put it right back anyhow. But what we did is we lined this spline up perfectly center on this roadway, which is damn near impossible to do under normal circumstances. All right. So what we can do is take this spline now. Okay. And there's my end. And I'm going to get Control B and I'm just going to shoot it off up here in the distance, not too far, but I'm going to keep that in the middle of the roadway. All right. Now pressing up, I'm going to go to start and I'm going to delete that. There you go. So now I have the starting point of my spline is smack dead set, just dead center in the middle of that intersection. All right. So it can't get any more center if I possibly tried. All right. So going down, I'm going to hit the down key, the down arrow key. That'll get me up to my end there. All right. And I am going to insert. I'm going to use insert to get, I'm looking right now. I'm trying to find out where, oh, there it is. Oh, yeah. Couldn't find it on my mouse. I have this set up on my mouse, so I don't have to use my keyboard for any of this. All right. And now hitting Control B again, we're just going to start laying out this spline and I'm going to go up here to this other intersection. Okay. Now I'm not really worrying about keeping my spline points too close together, like my control vertexes or anything like that, because we're going to do this a slightly different way. Okay. So all I'm trying to do here is I'm just want to, I want to keep it the shape of the road. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to, I'm not worrying about the elevation. I'm just worrying about keeping it lined up where I want my road to be. All right. And that's all I'm doing. And this definitely, this helps speed things up tremendously. Trust me. Okay. So like I said, all I'm doing is hitting insert as I go to insert that additional control vertex there. All right. Hit insert, Control B. Now the thing with this, when you come in to your, the button layout is a little funky on this. I'm used to my mouse at home. But anyhow, when you try to come into this intersection here, right, into this next branch, you want to try to keep it as straight on as possible. and I mean like square to the actual roadway. Okay. If you come in on an angle, man, it's going to be impossible to try to mate your roadways up nicely, like nice and even. So as much as possible, try to keep it square. Don't come in on a hard angle or anything like that. Come in nice and straight if you can. All right. So once you got that done, now you have your spline done. You go from intersection to intersection. Okay. So your spline's all done. That looks pretty good. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep spline highlighted, and I'm going to go up to that spline CSV creator setup. I'm going to click on that. All right. Now we need to put in our map name. Now this is something, since you're going to be doing this fairly often, you can actually pre-populate this as well. And I'll show you how to do that. If you go up the window, go to script editor, updated spline scripts, CSV creator setup. And this is if you don't feel like typing this in every single time. All right. This is the way we can do this. Under map name, you want to put in your map name, and mine is map US underscore tutorial series. All right. Now my CSV distance, since this is a roadway, I want it to be 5. I want to keep my control vertexes pretty close together. All right. So we're going to hit save. All right. And I'm going to run that one more time. CSV creator setup. Actually, let's get rid of it. Let's X these out and try that one more time. CSV creator setup. There we go. All right. So now you can see how it kind of auto populated that for me. Right. So I didn't have to go through and type all that stuff in every single time. All right. So once you have that done, right, you want to keep spline highlighted, go up to spline CSV creator, click on that. Okay. That part is done. Now you want to get over to your CSV folder, because if you did not already have one, it created one for you. All right. So I'm going to go into map US tutorial series, and you can see I have the CSV data. And I'm going to take the spline CSV i3D that it created for me, and I'm going to drag that into my map right now. Okay, now you can see my spline changed a little bit, right? So now it has a lot more control vertexes than what I originally put down. Now, the only difference between this spline and the one that I put down, and by the way, I want to drag this up in a spline placement because I'm going to use this spline instead. I'm going to delete my original one because I don't need that anymore. And this, I'm going to rename the spline. You normally, if you're using the Farmer Boy's tools, you're not going to have to do this because he has it written into the code that it will recognize spline CSV. But I still use the 1.3 version for doing my roadways, and it won't recognize that. So I need to keep mine that it says spline. All right. So from here, you can see that now it actually hugs the contour of your map surface, right? Of your ground surface. And this is something that we didn't do originally, right? We weren't really paying attention to elevation. We were just making sure that our road was heading in the right direction. All right. So from here, we can actually take, if you want, you can take this endpoint and you could actually drag it up onto your road there. I'm not really going to worry about that because I'm going to show you in a minute what we're going to do about that. All right. So that looks pretty good. There's my spline. That's set up pretty good. All right. From here, go up to spline placement. All right. We have 2. Now mine is already set up. All right. Since I pre-populated mine through Farmer Boys. All right. But like I said, with this one, I'm not actually going to use this one right here. I'm going to use the 1.3 version. Let me try it really quick because I think it should go okay. Let me make sure everything is set up right here. We have object distance of 2. We're good. Stay upright. Yes, we want to stay upright. No random scale. Some of this you don't have, like the internal Y rotation, stuff like that. That's stuff that I put in myself. So you don't need that. Random order. Align with terrain. See, now here's the difference. This is one of the reasons that I don't use this script here, right? Because I changed my version so that I can either choose that when I put down my objects, I can either align them with the terrain, or I can keep them aligned with the spline. And in this case, aligning them with the spline is much more important than having it aligned with the terrain. All right. Especially with Spline Street Constructor, because when you align it with the terrain, you can get some really funky values. And I'm going to show you what I mean about that in just a couple of minutes. All right. So this is why I changed my script, and I have I have this checkbox that says align with terrain. You probably do not. If you went over to Farmer Boys and downloaded your own copy, you probably do not have this checkbox. So I added that in there. I think by default, that script automatically aligns with the terrain, and which in most cases is good. But in this case, it's hit and miss, right? Mostly not good, because I've had nothing but problems with Spline Street Constructor when I tried to align it with the terrain. All right, that's the reason that I had my spline perfectly aligned with the terrain. Okay, so this way we can just follow the spline, have it aligned to the spline. Say that 10 times real fast, which is basically the same as a terrain. But like I said, you just don't want it to align to terrain because you're going to have some kind of issues there. Now you can give it a shot. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But I'm just trying to tell you that it's been my experience that you get some really funky issues there. All right, so let me go back. I want to go to Window, and I'm going to double check my version 1.3 script to make sure that this is set up okay. And that one is Spline Placement Execute. I'm going to put my my post every 2 meters. I'm going to set one down. No object distance at start, or no object at start. I'm going to keep that at false. That'll make a difference, and I'll show you where that's going to make a difference in a minute. Stay upright. You want to be true because you don't want to be leaning on goofy angles or anything like that. No, we don't want to use a distance table or random order. So false, false, false. Y rotation, false. Random scale, false. All right, so everything else can stay false. Align with terrain, false. All right, so we don't want that to align with the terrain. All right, so that looks pretty good. I can close out of here, get that all closed up. Now with spline placement highlighted, what I want to do is I'm going to go up to scripts and I'm going to run down to spline placement execute. Okay, now there's all of our posts. It just laid down every single one of those posts that we made. All right. This basically is the equivalent of, when those people, like when you watch those other tutorials where they're taking all those white roadway pieces or whatever the heck they're using, and they're laying those things down. This is the equivalent of that. All right. Except it didn't take us 15 years to do it. It only took us 15 seconds. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over here to my first post. All right. And I'm going to move this forward just so it mates up with the edge of my intersection. Now make sure you don't go left and right with it, because since you didn't move your spline, and make sure you didn't rotate your spline at all, by the way. You should know that by now, not to rotate your spline. So you should be lined up dead center with this intersection right now, okay? So just drag it forward. Now, some people say, well, it does. Like if you look at the dot there, that would be about the exact center of this post. All right, that's where the roadway is going to stop. But I like to give myself some wiggle room. All right, so I'll bring the whole post in like so. So, at least a little bit of my roadway is going to be overlapping with my intersection. And I do that for a reason, that if I need to nudge things one way or the other, I have a little bit of wiggle room, right? Because if you make things completely flush, you have no room. If you need to nudge this intersection one way or the other, you can't do it. Now you're going to create a gap in your roadway. All right, so now the height value of that is off. You can see how much of the bottom of that post sticks below my road surface. Oh, shoot. I skipped a step. Darn it. Ay, ay, ay. All right, so let's just forget about that. Let's go back up to spline placement. Let's hit spline placement delete. This is a good way to figure out how to delete all your objects that you just put on there. Ay, ay, ay. See, it's getting late. This is my excuse every time. Getting late. I'm tired. All right. Now, the one thing about this, what I don't like about this start here is it's actually out on the road surface, and I don't want it to be on the road surface. I want it to be on the surface of my, intersection. So what I did there, all right, I kept that perfectly lined up, is I just hit Control B, and instead of my map surface, I moved that up to my on top of my roadway here, because this is gonna matter in a minute here. All right, so the one step that I forgot about, which I didn't show you guys, now with spline highlighted, go to terrain height setup, click on that. All right, now under set center width, all right, we want to put that on 8. I'm gonna keep my roadways at 7.5 meters. So I'm gonna flatten out my roadway a little bit wider than what my actual streets are going to be. Right. So I'm going to do 8. So if you're doing like say 5 meters, you might want to put 6 in here. If you're doing an 8-meter roadway, you might want to put 9 or 10 in here. Okay. So you're going to have to play around with that one to figure out what you want to do there. All right. Now, what you just seen me do here by moving this spline up onto, I hit Control B to move it up onto my intersection, right, on top of the object instead of sitting below it, is because when I fill in this roadway, I want it to come up to that surface. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that. There are other ways that I can show you how to get this roadway where you need it without having to move the spline at all, right? So if you're nervous that you might not be centered anymore, there's other ways to get around that. But anyhow, so what I'm going to do now is once the spline is highlighted, I have my center distance set, my center width. I'm just going to go to terrain height. I'm going to click on that. Wow, that actually took a quick minute. Mine never takes that long. So, all right, what we did there, okay, is we flattened out an 8-meter section of a roadway. So if our roadway is sitting like on the side of a hill, you know, you don't want your street to be on the side of a hill. You want a nice flat surface that you can work with here. All right. And that's exactly what we did, is we created a nice flat roadway all the way up to our next intersection. Okay. And with me moving that spline up, now I made that road surface come up to my intersection. If not, I still would have had a little bit of a gap below there. But like I said, that wouldn't be a really, really big deal, because I'm going to show you right now how we would have worked around that. All right, so now we can go ahead and we can put those posts back down. Let's go to spline placement, go to scripts, spline placement, execute, get those posts put down. Okay, there we go. Man, I'm still surprised it took that long just to flatten out the road surface. All right, now we're going to click on that. This is only a 2-kilometer map. I do roads literally that go the entire way across a 4-kilometer map, and it usually goes a lot quicker than that did. All right, so now I'm going to drag this over. And like I said before, you know, with the way that this lines up, I'm going to keep it so maybe like one post width is into the intersection, because I don't want that, you know, I want to have a little bit of wiggle room. Now I'm going to come up here to my translate Y, and I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to use my, you can either use your up and down arrow keys or your left and right. It doesn't matter. All right. See, my right arrow key raises it. Left one lowers it. My down arrow key raises it. Up arrow key lowers it. Now, can you see that bottom edge there? This highlighted green edge right here? What I'm trying to do is I sync that just below. All right. So that's visible. Here's completely visible. This one looks like it's maybe right at the surface. Sometimes I'll sync it either below or right there, but you don't want it floating above. So what we're trying to do is get this lined up at the exact same height, right? Not always so easy to get it super exact, but you can have a look and see where you're at, and it's pretty dang close. So I'm okay with that. So now we can shoot over to the other end. All right, and with this, and that's what I meant there. So if you would have had, by what I was saying before, you could have found a way around that. If that gap was still there, that's how you would overcome that. You didn't have to move that spline up onto the surface of this intersection. You can compensate for that by just raising the post up so that is level with the intersection. Because when it creates that street, it doesn't care about the spline. It's looking at the posts themselves. All right. Now, if I wouldn't have moved the spline and I had a gap underneath this roadway, What I would have done is I probably would have deleted this post, because what's going to happen is when it creates that roadway from here, from this post here to this post here, it'll make a really sharp, like upward angle, right? And you don't want to do that. So I would delete either one or two posts to kind of stretch that out. And let me show you what I mean here. Oops, I always do that. Okay, so what I mean is if there was a gap here, right? If maybe this intersection was hovering up above my road surface by whatever distance, by moving this post up and leaving this one down at ground level, all right, you're going to create kind of a steep angle. So, I mean, and that's a little exaggerated. That's a little too steep, but from here to here, right? So the rest of your roadway will look straight like so. And then when you get up to this area between these two posts, it's going to take a quick upward turn like that. To try to eliminate that, what I like to do is I'll delete maybe this post. You got to watch how many you delete, but I'll delete this post. And all that will really do is just increase that distance. So instead of going from here to this post, it'll go from here to this post. It'll be my section. So as I come across, I'll have a more gradual incline instead of that real sharp. I know it may not make a lot of sense what I'm saying now, but the more you play around with this and the more you toy around with it, you'll figure out what I mean. All right. I've made enough roadways that I make sense in my head. I know what I'm talking about. Trust me. All right. So with this here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this blue arrow and I'm going to move her forward, same as I did on the other one. All right. I'm going to keep it in one post width. All right. Now you can see that that one actually looks pretty good. I need to move it up just a tiny bit, it looks like. All right. I'm just going to give it that one click and I'm good. All right. So now I am prepared. My whole roadway has been flattened. Everything looks pretty good. My posts are all set down. I got them where I want them. Now this is like rolling the dice here. This is 50-50. This is where most people run into issues. Okay. Now normally what you do, not normally, this is what you do. What you want to do is you go up to your placed objects transform group, right? Click on that and they're all highlighted. All of these objects are now highlighted. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to file and I'm going to go down to export selection. Okay. And I'm going to keep this at the same place where I keep all the other stuff that I'm working on. So I'm going to go into tutorial series, objects, roads. All right. And I'm going to call this one placed objects. Placed objects. All right. So I exported that. Now, normally what most people do from here is they're skipping a very important step, which you shouldn't really have to do this step, but you need to do this step. What they'll normally do is they're going to go in the Spline Street Constructor, right? And what you can do is you can import these placed objects. That's what we're going to do, but we're going to put another step in between there. And to me, this is a very important step. Okay. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my folders here and I'm going to navigate over to that placed object. Go to objects, roads, this placed object, right click, and I'm going to open with Notepad++. Okay. Now this is, I can have a look at what's going on inside of here. Now I can see I need to tweak my script, right? Because this first line right here is going to throw an error. I can tell it's going to throw an error because it has the scale and everything like that in there. And it's just not going to work out. I can even show you what it's going to do. So let's get back over to Spline Street Constructor. Let's import this file in here. Placed objects. Okay. It brought in 153 spline points. I click go. Spline point 1 and 2, blah, blah, blah. Something's wrong with it. All right. Well, what's wrong with it is this first line. Okay. That's throwing it off. And the way to get rid of that, and this is transferred over from the spline itself. All right. You go into your script setup here, the script editor. All right. And right here where it says no object at start, and that says false, change that to true. And that line should no longer show up for you when you check your i3D. All right. So go back into the text editor. All right. So like I said, with that change, the next time I run this, this line should no longer show up. But it's not a big deal that it's there now. We just delete it. All right. So delete that line. All right. Now what I'm doing is I'm going through here and I'm looking at this rotation right here in the middle. On each one of these, you want your X to be 0 and you want your Z to be 0. So it doesn't matter what that middle number is. That's just a rotation. But you want 0, 0. If you see 180 anywhere in there, we're going to need to fix that, because that means your road is going to flip over on itself 180 degrees. And we don't want that to do that. And it does it. Trust me, it does it. If you go the wrong direction with the spline, when you check this, you'll see, and we're going to come across this problem. So I'll do a couple of roadways with these guys just to show you that this problem is bound to come up at some point. All right. But what we have here looks really good, right? So none of these zeros are 180s. Everything says 0. Everything looks really good. All right. So I'm just going to hit Control S and I'm going to resave that. All right. Now I'm going to go into my Spline Street Constructor. All right. I'm not going to use any borders. So I'm going to close my borders off because I'm not going to use any of those. I'm going to keep my width at 7.5 because I think that's how wide I made my intersections. I am not quite sure. We'll find out in a minute. These two boxes are going to be unchecked. Oh, shoot. There is something that I did not go over originally when we were going over the Spline Street Constructor. If you click on the settings here, okay, there's some parameters here. There's a minimum length, minimal angle, minimal bending, minimal Z rotation, blah, 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 right on down the line. All right. You really, really, really want to look at the instructions for these. Now, minimal length, I think this has something to do with like the subdivision maybe, or the minimal angle. I think one of these parameters, it's almost all ones, and that will work pretty well. I think for me, I think this might work. I think this might work okay. I have to double check my parameters at home. So really quick, let's get over to the instructions there, and I can kind of show you what those settings mean. Parameters for the borders, road segments, spline points. All right. Parameters. Okay, so here we got minimal length, minimal angle. Minimal length, the smallest length of a subdivision, but it became undercut if other criteria are violated. And basically, like I said, that is what I was saying about subdividing. And that's the minimal length of that subdivision. So I've used 1 plenty of times, and that's fine. And that's if it needs to subdivide. That's not that it's going to. All right. And 2 might work fine there too. That's just fine. A lot of these you're going to have to play with, because 2 of these are very important, that if you're doing any kind of like elevations, if you're going uphill and you notice like your roadway doing some really funky things, there's a way to get rid of it by adjusting these angles here. Okay. The next one is your minimal angle. That's the subdivision of the roadway when the angle becomes larger than this value. All right. So here's your angle, say like 3, 4, 5 degrees. If your roadway exceeds that value, it will start subdividing. All right. Now, I don't think this means angle as far as slope. I think this next one down here, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but I think that right here, subdivision of the structure when the slope changes becomes larger than its value. All right. So when you're going uphill with this minimal, whatever this is, where it says 1, all right, it'll subdivide if your slope becomes greater than that value. All right. So I usually keep mine. Where's mine at? Right here. All right. 5.5, 1.5 minimal bending. What is it saying that is? Okay. That's the maximum angle for bank turns. And then what it'll do, and this has a lot to do with this camber and this bottom one here, where it says if the check mark is not set, the upper structure is created. If the check mark is set, the lower structure possibly has more triangles. All right. Now you remember when I said back on the main screen, these 2 check boxes here under roadway geometry, make sure those are unchecked. When those are checked, all right, that's where a lot of this comes into play, this rotation and this camber. All right. But with these unchecked, you're really not going to have to worry about that too much. Trying to think how I used to have mine set. 5, 10, 15, maybe. I'm going to keep 15 there. Let's go with I'm going to put 1 there just so I can show you what this does. All right, let's stick with that. Now, this is going to take a lot of trial and error. I can double check my my values at home and let you guys know what I'm using there, because it does make a difference. It definitely makes a difference in your road surface. You're going to want to play around with that. And this is where I say to read the instructions. Go through and reread if you need to, because you're going to need to know what those values mean and what they do. Hopefully, I can show you an example where changing those values will actually fix any kind of issue that's wrong with your road. But for right now, like I said, we went through the i3D here in the text editor. Everything looked good. I checked the settings. My settings are normally where I keep them. Well, more or less. That's not exactly where I keep them, but we're going to go with that because that looks okay. I'm not going to use a border at all. I like to have a flat roadway, just the way I prefer to do it. Road texture, we're going to use road. And that is pretty much it. So from here, you can see it threw an error last time. So if you would not have gone into the text editor and took a look at your i3D, you wouldn't know that you had this issue here. But now we went through, we got rid of that first line because I could see that that was causing a problem. Everything else looked good. Oh, now it's going to give me this again. Oh, maybe I didn't re-import it. Let's re-import this one more time. Let's try that. Okay, now it created the roadway, no problem. All right. So now that it did that, what it should have done is it should have exported. I don't need to close that yet. It should have exported to where we told it to under something called RD1. Now, this is going to be your completed road i3D that you're looking for. All right, so let's get this open. Let me get into completed road. I'm going to drag this in. All right, now you can see it laid it down right smack dab where we wanted our roadway. All right, now mine looks a little bit wider, so I probably only had a 7 meter instead of a 7.5. All right, but you can see what we got here now. If we take actually, let me go down the whole part of this is underground. You need to come through and either use your smoothing brush or what have you and get rid of some of this stuff so you can actually come through, smooth this out a little bit like so. And at some point you do need to come back and touch up your roadways, you know, get everything nice and smoothed out really good. Make sure you don't have any gaps in your roadway. But what I'm doing here is, one, uncovering it because you're going to need to. It's just going to look weird if you leave it that way. But two, I'm checking for any defects or deficiencies in my road that need to be repaired. So if I need to make any changes to the Street Constructor program and rerun it, I will. Now, I'm going to have to do it anyhow because my road is wider than my intersection. I have my road set at, either that or I need to redo my intersection. But I have my road set to 7.5 and it kind of looks like I had my intersection set at 7. All right, not the end of the world. I can rerun this very easily, right? Just go back inside of here and I will change that 7.5 to 7. Click go one more time. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to delete the ones that I currently have in there. All right. And I am going to re-import this completed road like so. All right, now you can see that it matches up a little bit better. Okay, so the only thing that does not match up exactly is, do you remember on the intersection part where I told you how to subdivide to make these lines nice and skinny and it looks really good? All right, well, unfortunately, when you do that, it doesn't really mate up with your roadway too well anymore. All right, you can see how my roadway is a little bit thicker than the lines on my intersection. All right, so if I go back and I redo that intersection without the subdivision, these will match up perfectly once again. All right, in the next video, I'll show you how to do that because for right now, we are definitely running long on time and we're at about 1 hour and 20 minutes right now. All right, so you can see with the road that it gave us really quickly, we have a left spline, and a right spline. All right, now they both run in the same direction. You don't have to worry about that. We can just reverse direction at a later date. But for now, we have a completed roadway, right? So you just have to hide the splines, get rid of the posts, And we'll basically get started on our next intersection, and then we can lay down our next piece. All right, so for right here, you can see that things didn't line up exactly 100%, and that's what I meant about being able to nudge things around. So I can turn this just a tiny bit, get it to line up a little bit better with my roadway there. That's about as good as it's going to get without redoing that intersection. All right, so you can see though that things lined up pretty nice. There's no big gaps or anything like that. Everything looks pretty good. They're two different colors. That's kind of throwing me off a little bit, but for demonstration purposes, I guess that's just fine. Normally I would pick the same texture for the roadway and the intersection. Apparently, I guess I used something a little bit different there. All right, and I did use the dotted line, so I will be able to show you in the next video how we can play with the texture length to clean this up a little bit and get this dashed line a lot shorter than what you see there right now. But anyhow, for right now, this video is running entirely too long, so we're going to leave it at that, and there will be a video number 3, so stay tuned for that. And with that being said, I am Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.